The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker at Elkins Consulting. I call myself the Chief Storymaker because I know that every day I have opportunities to make stories through my actions, my behavior, my words. And today's guest is a great introduction from my friend Sophie Lechner, who recently published a book. I highly recommend you look for it. The link will be in the show notes associated with this podcast at elkinsconsulting.com so that you can take a look at this book on marketing. It's for some reason, I'm forgetting the title of the book, but we will put it in the show notes associated with this podcast. It's excellent. It's an excellent resource for people who want to market without feeling like a slimy salesperson. Joyce, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited, and I have enjoyed listening to your show. So I'm excited to share my journey with your listeners.
Excellent. Well, because you've been listening, you know that I love to start the podcast by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know about them. And I do that so that we get a more complex view of the complicated human you are. I have frustrations around the way we seem to anchor people in time based on one interaction we have with them. And by sharing something about yourself that most people don't know, it gives our listeners some context for what they're going to hear later in the show. So what do you think? What can you share with us?
Well, I think one of the unusual things was I became an empty nester, and my 3 children had graduated from university and got married, and I was divorced at the time. And way back when I was in high school and going into university, I had an opportunity to represent Canada at an international Girl Guide camp in Sweden. And at that camp, I met people from all over the world. And to me, I grew up in Edmonton, Edmonton was really not a multicultural city. It's far north in Alberta, and it isn't the big cities like Toronto or Vancouver where you have a lot of tourists coming. And so I was so impressed with all these different people and the nationalities and the food they have. And the stories they told about their school, about living, about the fact that they never had any snow. And remember, I'm 88, so this was back in 1954 when there were no television. Well, there was one television station we had in Edmonton, but there were no cell phones, there was no internet, there was none of this. So we had a series of books called Lands and Peoples, and I loved that book. And so before I went to Sweden, I looked up the various countries that were going to be at the camp. So I'd read about them in the book, and then I had some conversation with them about whether it was true or not, or what they ate, and we went to eat with them and try their food. Some I liked, some I didn't, but it was good. And then I met Lady Baden-Powell, who is the founder of the Girl Guide movement or the Girl Scout movement worldwide. And she made an impression on me about her motto was, it's not how much you have, it's how much you share and give that really defines you. And so that sort of a motto became mine as I traveled and grew up. And it really wasn't able to come into force until after my family had grown and I went to work in Saudi Arabia. for 3.5 years.
Wow.
I did. And I was there when the Matawa, the religious police, were in full force. So we wore our bayas over our bayas, our black robes, and I had to cover my hair. But we were given more privileges than the Saudi women. However, I did get to know some Saudi women and families, and I would go and visit them in their house, which was so rewarding to me because they were so open and so friendly. And, I was working in the hospital and very well respected. I had no problems or any problem at all. And my boss, was very generous, very kind, and included me in a lot of activities. Once when I went to dinner at his house with the people who were speaking at a conference that my department, the Quality Improvement Department, had arranged, and it was inviting people from all over the city and all over the country to come at a 5-day conference. It was a challenge, but we did it, and we got a lot of good publicity, and it increased our quality improvement department's acceptance in the hospital. So it was really good. But now I'm rambled on a bit. That's a kind of a long answer to your story.
No, this is wonderful, Joyce, because I keep coming back to the fact that you grew up in Edmonton, Canada, which is a small town. Well, not small by Montana and Canada standards necessarily, but relatively small. And you had spent I'm assuming you hadn't really traveled outside of Edmonton much before you left. And then
down to the States, my car to Spokane, and we did get down to California one time, but that was all. I spent my summers at the lake.
That's English-speaking country from one to the other. And I know going to a country where you don't speak the language, especially in the 50s, would have been really interesting because English wasn't the most common language then.
Right. It wasn't.
That must have been such a challenge for you. And I'm so impressed that you decided to do that this was something. Think about how brave that was. It's brave now. It was even more brave when women weren't expected. Women didn't travel overseas alone like that in the 50s.
Well, in the 50s, we traveled by boat as a group when we went over with the guides. We were with a group. There were 12 of us.
Yes, but they weren't people you knew, right?
People from all over Canada.
So, exactly.
It was a wonder. I mean, it was a real honor to be representing Canada. And it was the first group that Canada had ever sent overseas to represent them in the guiding movement. And that was really special. And I must say that for me, the guiding movement really had a strong impact. I had a wonderful mentor. Our guide leader was Peggy Martin. She was a little lady, and she just gave her whole heart and soul to all the girls in the organization. But she taught me so much. And I really feel that my time with the guide movement gave me the opportunity to learn how to manage and how to organize and how to work with people. And then that allowed me to eventually become a hospital CEO. I do believe that. And I'm so sorry, guiding is not what it used to be. It's just seems to be other things have taken priority.
I agree in some ways. I know that there are exceptions. There are some groups like here in Montana that are still bringing girls together, creating community, building their confidence, doing exactly what they are intended to do. I know that there are other places in the world that aren't doing that, but there are exceptions for sure.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that because I just spoke to about 200 people yesterday, and I asked the ladies in the room, it was a couples group, and I asked the ladies in the room to put up their hand if they had been a Girl Guide. And there were probably a third of the people have been a Girl Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people were in their 50s, 60s. So that would have been after I was, but still when the movement was still very prominent. And I was so pleased. And we had good stuff.
This is a good time for that to reemerge, I think.
I think so. I really do, because when I went into nursing school, I was class president, and the director of nursing asked me to organize a university open house for their fall open house that they had, and nursing had never done that before. And, it was just like planning an outing with my girls to go to the dairy or to go to the museum or something.
Right.
It worked out really well. And I thought to myself, yes, that's where I learned my skills like that. And I'm so grateful.
Well, I think there are other places too where it's still happening, not necessarily through Girl Scouts, Girl Guides, but I know the 4-H groups here in Montana, all the ag groups are doing similar work with young people.
Yes, I do recognize that. And I'm so glad to hear that. I hope that we can move back into that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I think we focus too much on academics and sports and not enough on other outside activities, or I mean, other activities outside of school where kids can learn leadership skills and organizing skills. And I think the most important aspect that I gather from this is creating community. How do you learn to create community, or how do you learn to choose to belong in community? Because those are two different things. Many people aren't the ones that would begin to create a community, but they also don't feel like they belong to community because they don't choose to contribute. What would you think about that?
I agree with you. I think there's right now, I think there are two things. Let's take sports for a minute. When you are beginning to be, say, a figure skater, I did figure skate. So, and I did synchronized swimming. So you have to put a lot of time into whatever sport you're working in. And sometimes, one, your academics in your school may suffer. Also, you're so busy doing that, you don't have time to be with the school activities, like play on the basketball team or play tennis or maybe badminton or whatever it is, because you're doing this one sport and it is so
consuming
that you can't. And so you're over here and the rest of the community in your school is here, but you're so busy doing this. You're up early in the morning, you go to the rink, you do figure skating, you come to school, and then after school, you go back to the rink. It's so, there's no time for it. I think that the children today are so, and maybe the parents are so incensed on getting things done well, that you have to be on the team. You have to be first string. You have to be this. And I'm not so sure that it's always the child that really wants to work.
I would agree with that for sure. I've seen a lot of that. And I know that a lot of parents keep their children busy so that they can't get into trouble. They can't do the things that they're concerned other kids are doing. At the same time, I feel like we're not giving our kids a chance to play, to be children, to have free time, to learn to be independent. I know when my younger son, he just graduated from the University of Montana in December. And when he thank you, it's very exciting. When he started college in fall of 2019, he was living in the dorms, and he said that there were mothers of students in the laundry room in the dormitory doing laundry for their student. And that he was teaching some of his friends how to do their laundry because they didn't know how.
Because my daughter taught her son how to do the laundry because she liked doing it. She liked doing it because she could look at the clothes, see if they're good, see if they were still
right,
etc. But
my boys definitely learned how to do their own laundry because if they wanted clean jeans and I hadn't done a load, they had to do a load. And it wasn't just their jeans, it was all the darks. And they understood darks and lights, darks and colors, whatever. But the other thing they learned was how to cook. And even though my younger son doesn't love cooking, the older son loves cooking and he's really good at it. The younger son doesn't love to do it, but he's really good at it because he likes to eat.
Well, that's good. I think these kinds of skills and giving the children the responsibility. But what I've seen happen is the children are so busy with all their curriculum activities plus their homework they have to do. They have very little time to do anything else.
Right.
And that includes laundry, includes all these other things.
Cooking dinner with their parent in the kitchen, learning those skills. Yeah. So let's come back to your story because I'm still thinking about you as you must have been in your 30s. Is that right? When you went to Sweden, how old were you?
When I went to Sweden, no, I was in
Sweden.
Sweden. When I went to Sweden, I was just in high school.
Oh, I thought you said you went after you were empty nested.
Oh, that's when I went to Saudi Arabia, and that was when I was 7.
Okay, so you were a high schooler when you went to Sweden to represent Canada.
And so that was really exciting. And there were other guides from across Canada who came, who I communicated with for years. Several have died already. And so I don't know how many of us are. I think there's 3 left now. But
so when you went to Sweden and you're meeting these people from all over the world, who is one person that when you think about that trip, their face pops into your head?
Well, Lady Baden-Powell, because it was so funny. I mean, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Let me tell you, I was asked to be in the opening ceremonies representing Canada. Of course, Lady Baden-Powell was there. So I had met her in London. Our ship landed in England. Then we went to London. We went to the Girl Guide house there, and she was there that afternoon. And so we met her very briefly. And then when we got to camp, she was at the camp. We didn't know that, but it was there. So I had met her for a second time when I was representing Canada at the opening ceremonies. And because we both spoke English, the people who were in charge introduced me again to her. And then the next time I met her, we were all the guides were invited to go to headquarters for lunch. Well, it just so happened that when I went, guess who was there? Lady Baden-Powell. And where did they sit me? Beside her. because I spoke English and she spoke English. I think that was the reason. Anyway, so we had a deeper conversation. Then she came to visit us at our camp. And where did they sit me? Right beside Lady Baden-Powell. And then we did something else and we were at another tea and they sat me beside Lady Baden-Powell. So we had very nice conversations. So we got to know each other a little bit. And she was always so gracious. Oh my goodness, what a gracious woman. The next time was just before she left. She said, well, I'm going to be coming to Edmonton. I had told her I lived in Edmonton. I'm going to be coming to Edmonton in 2 years. And I said, well, let's get together. So we did. She told me when she was coming and we arranged to meet. And she signed all my photographs for me. And
Wow.
And she gave me this wonderful letter afterwards. It was so special. It was so well written, and it was just full of love. And I just cherish it deeply. And so she really did make a big impression on me. And I was so amazed at how could she develop this organization of the Girl Guides all over the world. And of course, her husband was the head of the Boy Scouts. And of course, they worked together to do that. But she did all the promotion for the Girl Guides. And it was pretty tough, especially in African countries when girls were not allowed to go to school or they weren't out of the house and things like that. So it was it was such an important part of my life, unexpectedly, that it really formed a lot of my pathways in my and so on. So it was really it was such a treasure. And that's when I decided I wanted to live and work in a foreign country. Well, I had to put that in the back burner until my kids were all married and left the house. And so I was divorced at the time, as I said. And so I said, well, what am I going to do? I was 58. And I thought, I'm going to live and work overseas. So I got a job in Saudi Arabia because I had worked in healthcare and I knew somebody who one of the doctors had been in Saudi Arabia. And he said, sure, why don't you do that? So I applied. And then I thought I had the job, but the next week when they were doing the papers, they put hold on all jobs. So I didn't get that one. So I had to apply for another job, and it took a while to get. So I took a cruise all around South America, starting from Florida, went through the Panama Canal, and all around South America, and it was very interesting. And there I decided I'm coming back to go to the Antarctic. It really caught my mind. So I did. And many years later, I came back and I went to the smaller part of Antarctica. And then 2 years later, I went to the southern part of Antarctica.
Wow.
And that was when I went to the dry valleys. And the dry valleys were the katabatic winds, 4,000 kilometers, 400 kilometers an hour, going through this area between two mountain ranges. It sucked up all the moisture. And what happened to be there were seals that had gone the wrong way. Like if you have the ocean and the ocean's here, the seals came up and there was just a small rise, but they couldn't really tell. And they went the wrong way and they just kept looking because they know that if they go down, they're going to get to the water. And they were going the wrong way and they all died. But the Catabatic winds mummified them, and they were time dated to 2,400 years, I think. And when I saw them, they were just like they were alive. They were sleeping. And now I looked on the internet just a couple months ago. The one seal that I think I have a picture of, what they showed was all rock. And all the bones were there. It was so sad.
Wow. Is that because the climate changed down there?
The climate has changed. There are no more Catabatic winds. It's not the driest place in the earth as it was when I was there. And so if anybody wants to go to Antarctica, they need to go fast because it is changing very, very quickly. In fact, some of the boats, there's only one boat that did that southern tour that I did, which was so spectacular because we saw all 8 of the different kinds of penguins.
Wow.
Amazing. And there were only 100 people on the ship.
Nice.
Able to get off the ship very quickly. We had more time on land, and everybody on our ship was very cooperative and helpful. Like when we went to the dry valleys, they said the slower people get in the airplane first. And everybody just agreed because the faster people would catch up, and anyway, they'd be the last ones out. There was no pushing and shoving and that sort of thing. It was just so well organized, and everybody felt really good about it.
Wow. Well, just listeners, just so you know, Glacier National Park is just north of where I live, about 3-hour drive between here and Edmonton. And it is also shrinking. Those glaciers are shrinking significantly. If you want to see the glaciers, you're going to have to see them in the next few years. Literally in the next 5 years, they're likely to shrink to nothing. And it's probably going to be harder this summer, to get to Glacier National Park because of the cuts to the Park Service. So campgrounds aren't going to open on time. The roads aren't going to be as accessible because they lost a lot of their staff. Montana was especially a hard hit with the federal job cuts. So listeners, if you want to see Glacier National Park, you're going to have to get on that boat right now, so to speak. Obviously, there are no boats here, but
That was such a beautiful park.
it is. Glacier is definitely unique and spectacular and very special place. Been there a couple times now.
And they said that they're going to close the walkway. There's a path, a hiking path that they have into Canada where it comes up through there. I was reading about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of changes going to happen up in these parks around here, my treasured spaces, public spaces. But so when you think about that letter, I'm stuck on the letter from Lady Powell because I think a lot about what we put in writing and how meaningful those handwritten notes can be. As a matter of fact, I interviewed a woman named Amy Daughters, who wrote a book about connecting with people that she knew on Facebook. She wrote like hundreds of handwritten cards, letters to her friends on Facebook to connect in a real, authentic way. And some people wrote back to her. And after interviewing her, I started being even more conscious about writing notes to people, whether it's a postcard, because then I don't have to fill a whole page. Or now I used to not like to buy greeting cards. It seemed very wasteful to me. But now when I see one, especially a hand-painted one from a local artist, or, the ones that I can I know the artist, or I can tell that this is the money that I pay for this is going directly to a small business owner. And I'll buy these special cards and write special notes on them and mail them through the mail. One of my dear friends was diagnosed with cancer a year ago last December. She's in recovery treatments now. She's doing very well. But every time I go out to our local wonderful little gift shops called the General Mercantile in downtown Helena, I would pick up a special card that I would think of her when I would see it and handwrite a note and pop it in the mail. And she would take a picture of it when she received it and send it to me on text and say, "Thank you so much. It arrived just at the right time for me. I really needed to see this letter." So when you told me she hand wrote a letter to you after her visit in Edmonton,
He typed it.
typed, but she signed it, right?
He typed it and signed it. I mean, she was quite old. Yes.
Because of that impact, is that something that you pay attention to more, is making sure people know how they've affected you? Because that's one thing I do now is I send notes to let people know. I send a lot of thank you notes now because of that conversation with Amy Daughters.
Yes, I do. I find that is one of the things that I do. I like connecting with people, even if it's just a text, but just hello, how are you, that sort of thing, and what's happening, how's your son, whatever it is. But I'm finding that, and it's interesting because the more I do that, the more I'm getting conversations back, which is
Yes.
instead of the thing that really, I just don't understand it when they send you back your comment and they put like on the bottom. So that's something nice. They copy it, put it in the send, and then put a heart beside it and send it back to me. In other words, they're saying, well, I liked your comment.
Right.
But, I think because I'm 88, I cannot get my head around that. Why can't you just type a few words?
Right. Make it an engaging thing rather than almost like a voyeur, right?
Right. But so I must tell you about the story. When I was staying with a family in Zimbabwe, I stayed with them for a few days, and I was to do the women's work. And the women's work was everything. You had to sweep the floor with a branch broom. They didn't have a real broom. And then they would have to make the mud bricks. So they'd squish their feet in the mud to get it all nice and smooth. And then you had to make them out and they'd dry in the sun. And they would use those to replace it when the rainy season came and some of the bricks would disappear. And it was quite interesting. We had to pound the grain. So one lady would pound and then I would pound, and you'd have these long sticks and you'd go down, up and down, up and down, up and down. But the rhythm had to be perfect. Otherwise, you would be down when you're supposed to be up. And I did it for a while, and then they came and said, "Oh, Joyce, well, now you've had that experience. Let me take over. You must be tired." Well, my muscles were a little tired, but it was that I was too slow. Get the job done. But we would wash the clothes in the river. So you go down the bank, and this river was so cold. My feet were so cold. And I had to scrub them, and we'd throw the jeans on the rock, and scrub them. There were no scrubbing boards or those sorts of things. And then we rinse them out and then put them on the trees to dry. It was, there was just a little bit of a clothesline, and that was for the master's shirts. And I almost lost his shirt. Oh
no.
And there's after where we were doing clothes, there were rapids, and if you lost it, it was gone. The thing was, I could never buy him a shirt again because there weren't any in the stores.
Right.
So before I left, I went to the store to buy a big pan because they just had a little tiny fry pan for doing dinner. And you had to make 3 batches of whatever it was because it was so small. I said, well, where's a big pan? Well, we don't have them. So I went to the grocery store or the store and bought all the pots and pans, which was 1 fry pan and 1 bigger pot. And I bought all the pencils and all the little notebooks to read to the school children. But it was really tough. And I was teaching algebra to the girl who was in high school. She had 1 book for the whole classroom of 34 people. And she got her book that night. And it was near the beginning of the course. And so she had to go through all the pages. We had to work all night long by candlelight to do these questions so that she could pass the book on to somebody else. And
wow.
It really hit home to me of how they use their resources, and they use their electricity to have 1 evening a week. They would have people coming and they would pay to come and they'd watch a church service. And then I'm going to ask you to guess, if you can, what other kind of a service they would watch. They asked me that question.
So they'd watch a church service?
And there was one other service. Because they were using a car battery to get the electricity to bring in the television.
Did they watch a cooking show?
They watched wrestling.
Wrestling? Like the made-up wrestling?
Yeah, the wrestling. And the guy asked me, he said, is this real?
Wow. It's almost embarrassing, though, when you think about what America exports. Of all the things that we export, reality TV and fake wrestling are the most embarrassing to me.
Well, I was really surprised. I could hardly, but I understand because we watched soccer. I can remember going to not that family, but another family. Everybody ran it off the car battery.
Right.
And they all brought their chair and we watched the World Cup or whatever it was. And everybody was cheering and having a good time. And we were all just sitting out on boxes or whatever you could.
Wow.
Bring. So it's that we have these things and they see them and they want to be part of that world.
Mm-hmm.
So it was years ago. Now, of course, it's everywhere. They've got cell phones. And when I traveled, there were no cell phones. They hadn't been developed.
Right. So, Joyce, I understand that you recently published a book. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. It's called Ants in My Pants. And it's called see that?
Ants in My Pants. Yep. I love it.
Just One Woman's Unexpected Journeys Across the Seven Continents. I should just grab a copy.
Ants in my pants. So, listeners, just so that you know, when I was a young girl, when a kid would be hyperactive, that they couldn't sit still, the question would always be, do you have ants in your pants? That's what the teachers would ask us. Do you have ants in your pants? Because we would be eager to move. We would be too antsy, as they say, to be sitting still. And so that's the reference to ants in my pants.
That's right. But it is a true story. I did get ants in my pants.
Oh, no. In Zimbabwe?
In Zimbabwe. I was waiting for the bus to go to the Shauna family. And it was 3 hours and late. And I was just getting tired of standing. And so I threw my scarf down on the ground and sat there. And then people looked at me, they'd look at me and they'd look at me, and nobody said anything to me. But looking back on it, I should have twigged that something was amiss. Well, it didn't take very long. I had slacks on. So it didn't take very long for the ants to find me. And they went in my pants. They just curled up my legs, and they were, I don't know how I didn't even feel them until they got up there and started biting my nice skin around my waist and my tummy. And oh my gosh. Well, then I did the Highland thing. I did the river dance. I did everything to try and make things happen. Well, everybody there was just killing themselves. The men were on the floor, the grass, just howling, and the women always.
Oh, you poor thing. Yeah. Or in the South, they'd say, oh, bless your heart.
Yeah. So they were doing this. And finally, I just broke out laughing. Well, when I broke out laughing, the lady said, come on. And the men turned and looked the other way, because this happens all the time. That
right.
Needs to go to the bathroom, there's no place to go. So they just look the other way because everybody has to go. And so they took their long skirts and held them up like this. And so they circled
a curtain.
And they made a curtain. And I was able to get rid of the pants. But the ants were the big black ones.
Oh.
And pinchers.
Yeah.
Their pinchers were amazing because they were used during World War II to hold searchers together. They would take an ant, pinch it, and then they'd open up the pinchers and then they'd hold the skin together like that. And they would kill the ant, and they would use that as sutures, and they were used.
Wow.
And
I had no idea.
They were really good. They had very little scarring, and those pinchers were amazing. So
ouch.
They were out. Yes, they were ouching. But it was something that they were telling me afterwards exactly how that happened.
Oh my gosh. That is amazing, Joyce. Ouch.
It's like they say that coconut water was used in World War II as fluids, just as an IV, because
right.
We didn't have any kind of fluid. I've heard that that's right, and then I've heard that it's not true. But I think it probably was true because, up in places like Papua New Guinea, where I was at one time, the jungle was there and there was no way to get any sort of supplies. And the U.S. and the Australian troops were needed very, and they did survive. So that's kind of another thing.
Right. Wow. Very resourceful. Joyce, I'm assuming people can order that book on bookshop.org.
Yes, or on Amazon.
Or I know a lot of my listeners are trying to avoid spending money on Amazon. So listeners, definitely check out bookshop.org if you haven't found that yet, because it supports small bookstores, independent bookstores.
I have it on, what is it?
So listeners, there will be links to purchase Joyce's book in the show notes associated with this podcast at elkinsconsulting.com.
They can find me on my website. Yeah.
Great. And listeners, across the board, anytime you meet somebody who's written a book that you enjoyed, tell them you enjoyed it. Even if you've never met them, you don't know if they'll ever remember, send them a message. Let them know you appreciated their book, because authors rarely hear from the people who read their books. Let them know. It means a lot to the author. Believe me, even the big time authors don't hear it enough. Even if they get sold, even if they sell a lot of books, they still haven't heard from the readers that the book was meaningful.
That's an interesting story, because the other day I was I was just getting an X-ray, and I was in my little cubicle, waiting my turn. And I heard, Joyce Perrin, Joyce Perrin. I said, here. And I was getting up to go. And she said, oh, not yet. She said, I bought your book a year and a half ago, because my book's been out just 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I had to come and find you because I saw your name on the list. She works at this place, the X-ray. And so she looked for me, found me, and came to me to tell me how much she enjoyed my book.
Wow.
And it was just such a delight. Yeah.
Isn't that the best? I call those the rock star moments, when you just feel like a total rock star.
Exactly. It was really lovely. And she said, I passed it on, and my friends like it. She told me some of the stories that really related to her. So that was
awesome. Very inspiring. Joyce, it's been such a pleasure getting to spend some time with you. Thank you for joining me on this podcast.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for having me. And I have enjoyed the conversation. It just went so fast. And I just am hoping that your listeners will enjoy what we were talking about.
I'm sure they will be inspired and motivated. I love the fact that you went at 56 or 58 years old when you decided to go to Saudi Arabia. And that gives me great inspiration and hope, because I'll be 55 this year. So excellent. I still have a long way to go.
Start planning what you
time to explore and transform my identity in my life again. I've done it multiple times in my life, and I'm going to do it again. So thank you for that.
That is great. If I could do that, that warms my heart.
Absolutely. Yeah. So listeners, it's your turn. No matter what age you are right now, what is something that you are willing to do that you haven't done before? What's something that's been an itch for you that you haven't been able to scratch? Because now is the time. Don't wait any longer. Don't face regret in your future. If we are going to have the same conversation a year from now and you're going to regret the same things you regret now, then something needs to change. I encourage you to reach out to Joyce, let her know that her book inspired you, and reach out to other authors that you have been inspired by their work. Let them know. Google stalk them until you can find a way to send them an email, or even better, a handwritten note. Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.